Well, so far it's been a really disjointed response, and that's the whole reason for the emergency meeting that was called today by Sweden. Sweden took over the rotating presidency of the EU Council on Sunday, so they've called a meeting of this emergency crisis response mechanism to try to have a unified policy on this, which so far hasn't happened. So the first country to take action here was Italy. Italy started requiring pre-departure COVID tests for anyone traveling from China. France and Spain have followed suit. Internationally, the UK, the US, and Japan have also done so. Sweden itself has announced its intention to do so. But the ECDC, the European health body, has said two things. One, they don't think that these pre-departure testings are necessary because they haven't identified any signs of new variants, and because they say cases in China have been actually decreasing since December 2nd. And the second, they say, is if the EU is going to have, if there are going to be pre-departure COVID tests, it needs to be done at EU level and not disjointedly by different countries, because, of course, the EU has a free travel area. And if Italy blocks people from coming in to their country from China because they've tested positive, that person could come into a neighboring country and just cross over the border. Now, the problem is many national authorities don't believe the Chinese figure. So that figure, that statistic that the ECDC is pointing to that says cases have been decreasing since December 2nd, well, most Western governments believe that China is actually covering up cases now. So we'll see what comes out of this meeting. There was a preparatory meeting yesterday in the European Commission, and I've been told that a majority of EU states want this pre-departure testing. So we are expecting this to pass today. We should have an announcement, I think, sometime around 6:30 tonight. The question is how they're going to do it, which airports they would set it up in. The logistics of it need to be worked out. But we are expecting some kind of decision on this at EU level today.
Dave, this is truly going to be a test for the European Union. What does it say about the lessons the EU may have learned from the beginning of the pandemic in 2020?
Yeah, so far, it does seem like the EU hasn't learned the lessons from its disjointed response in March of 2020 to the pandemic's origins. Of course, then we saw disjointed national measures, very little coordination, haphazard border closures between EU countries. It was really an unprecedented and chaotic situation. Now, all kinds of new bodies were set up since then. The European Health Union was fortified to try to make it easier to take quick, unified decisions when there's a health emergency like this. Now, the ECDC says this isn't a health emergency, but it's clear that some governments think it might be, and so far the reaction has been neither quick nor unified. Now, the original sin here, you could say, would be Italy acting alone in starting to require those tests, but of course the Italian government would say that they couldn't have waited for some kind of EU position because it would take too long and they needed to take urgent action. But certainly so far, this has not been a good sign for whether the EU learned lessons from its disjointed response to the pandemic in 2020. Again, as I say, I think that we're going to be getting a position here on requiring those tests across the EU. But the fact that it took so long between when Italy first started requiring these tests and now, and especially if they take the decision now, it's going to take a while for different countries to actually start requiring these testing. It's not a great sign for whether the EU is prepared for the next health emergency.
Dave, thank you for that. France 24's Brussels correspondent Dave Keating.